You make a mistake, you get walked into a room by your best friend, you don't walk out again.
When you have revenge in your heart, you might as well dig 2 graves, one for you, one for them.
They have no idea what we do out there in order to keep that thin blue line between chaos and anarchy.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Millennials Choice show. You know me, Matthew Ablakan, and I'm here with my brother from the same mother.
What's going on, everybody?
Danny Ablakan, and we've got a very interesting guest today. It's, I think we've been really getting a lot of interesting guests recently. And
always, man.
Yeah.
Always the best.
And this one is a segue into a new thing that we're working on. It's top secret, and it's going to be a very good segue into that new topic. And I want to welcome to the show Greg Kading. Greg is a former LAPD detective. You may have heard of Greg's story. He was looking into the Tupac and Biggie murders, and he's got a very awesome story. You guys can check him out on other channels as well, Vlad TV, Valuetainment. Shout out to those guys. Greg, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Yes, good morning from Toronto on our end, and you're in LA, right?
Just outside of LA, yeah.
Nice. Awesome. How's the weather out there?
Beautiful today. The sun's up. Most of the rain that we've been getting seems to have passed on. It's actually gorgeous out.
Good stuff. We have major thunderstorms today, so hopefully we don't lose power. But everything should be good. Greg, just for those of you that are hearing about you for the first time, give us a little bit about your background. Talk to us about everything from being an LAPD detective to your cases, and let's get into that.
Okay. Well, in a nutshell, I was with the LAPD. I retired after 25 years. One of the last cases I handled was the cold case investigation of Christopher Wallace, aka Biggie Smalls. And of course, you can't investigate Biggie without investigating Tupac, because we always knew that those two homicides were probably going to be closely linked. And so we got to looking into that and looking at some of the old theories, came up with what we thought were very conclusive understandings of what took place and who committed those murders. And then after I retired, I wrote a book about it. The book became a documentary. The documentary became a limited series. And so I got my appetite a little wet for telling stories, in that medium on television. And so now I work in production and work on other documentaries.
That's awesome. So how long were you a detective?
I worked as a detective almost my entire career. I didn't make the rank of detective until 1999. But prior to that, I was working in the detective, functioning as a detective, as a police officer.
Gotcha.
So, since probably 1990, approximately.
Nice. And is it something you always wanted to be when you were growing up? You wanted to get into policing, or how did that, come your way?
No, actually, growing up, I actually never thought that I'd become a cop. I was more inclined to think I was going to be like a rock star. And then after that, really obviously wasn't going to happen. I didn't have the discipline of sitting there and learning the chords on a guitar. And then I thought I was going to be a football player, but I didn't have the talent for that either. And just through a series of events, one of my friend's fathers was a sheriff's deputy, and he kind of mentored me and influenced me into this career. So I applied for it just because I needed a job, and I thought it would be a good, reliable income. And that led me to actually falling in love with the profession. And I really always enjoyed investigations more than anything else within that field. I was never one of the, SWAT guys or tactical guys. I was just always intrigued by investigating things and trying to figure out what had happened, within the context of policing.
Yeah, it's almost like what Brian Tracy says about sales. No one really woke up one day and said, I want to be a salesperson. You kind of just backed into it somehow. And And then you fall in love with it. That's what we did, and when we got into the business first. So yeah, that's interesting.
That's awesome. I was just gonna ask, Greg. So a lot of people really don't know what goes on, inside the mind of a detective. Can you we talk about the mindset here, on our show a lot, and we just want to know, what kind of mindset do you need to have in order to do that kind of work? Because I imagine it's not easy. Like, there's probably a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of rough days, on the clock. Can you talk to us a little bit more about, like the mindset of the person you need to be to do what you did?
So, obviously you have to be a person that likes to be challenged, and that first of all, let me preface this, is that as an investigator, a lot of it is also kind of determined by your personality type. So I'm a little bit OCD, and I think that is a good attribute to have if you're going to be an effective investigator. Once I lock on to something, I get just laser focus on that, and I want to know everything that can possibly be known about that subject. And so it's kind of an obsessive thing, and I think that is a personality trait that makes a good investigator. Of course, there's investigators that just take their jobs a little maybe less seriously. And so the mindset has a lot to do with the personality type. And, and this happens in all fields. There's people that are really driven because they have a deep passion or drive for whatever it is that they're attempting to accomplish. But of course, there's people that are in that same profession that don't have that same drive. So the best investigators are going to be a little bit obsessive, and you don't leave any stone unturned. And the most important thing is the view of objectivity. That's critical. If you don't have the ability to be absolutely objective, you will spend so much time going down rabbit holes. And, while you're going down that rabbit holes, the truth is evading you somewhere else. And so you've got to be extremely objective. You can't fall in love with a theory. All you have to fall in love with is the pursuit of truth. And so we see in investigations, oftentimes things get really distracted and things get really diverted. And oftentimes cases don't get solved for that very reason.
Greg, do you believe all those principles are stuff that we have to actually put into our business as well? I heard being obsessed in terms of the focus. You got to be obsessed being focused, in my opinion. Do you see that maybe the police force nowadays, with social media and all these different distractions, may have taken a turn for the worse? Or do you see people in the police force more focused than ever before?
Well, right now, currently, law enforcement is in a sad state of affairs in America. We've just we're at a real difficult place. There's just a lot of mistrust for the police department. Our concept of truth is eroding to where everything's subjective, and people only, they look at the truth only through their own personal hearts and minds, as opposed to being willing to just objectively look at situations and let facts and evidence dictate what truth is. So it's just it's a strange place in America right now within the law enforcement profession. A lot of cops are just really apprehensive to even be proactive, just because of all the scrutiny they get. They're asked to make split-second decisions, and then they're raked over the coals, so to speak. For even a perception of misconduct. So it's a tough place in America right now. I don't know if we get it resolved, but there are things due to technology that are really helping cops out. Like you mentioned, social media. Social media has become a huge tool being used by law enforcement because people can't help sharing their life
They have to.
on these platforms, and oftentimes in doing that, they're incriminating themselves without even knowing it. And you know, we have the technology these days. Let's say that there's a shooting incident. Well, there's divisions within law enforcement, and particularly within the LAPD, that can go back and look at where something happened and throw essentially a virtual net, a digital net over that area, and see what people had tweeted, what people had sent out, through different types of digital media, and capture things that you can't see with the naked eye. You think your crime scene is just the bullets on the ground and maybe the blood in the gutter, but all of a sudden you're seeing somebody that was on a balcony had tweeted something.
Yeah.
And you can now go back and identify who that was and ask them, what did you see?
Right.
That's amazing.
And you would not, years ago, you would not have known to even contact that person.
Right.
So there's some really interesting advantages to technology. It's really hard to get away with much today. But the justice system itself, the way it is set up, is really hindering the effectiveness of law enforcement.
Just a quick follow-up on that, Greg. I was going to ask you, so do you think, in your opinion, that the advancement of technology has helped law enforcement more in terms of their job, or has it helped criminals to, do more, things that are illegal? Like, for example, the dark web. Now people can easily, access, drugs or, hitmen, things like that. Apparently, I've never been on the dark web. Putting that out there.
You sound like an expert.
But no, but that's what I've heard. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because I also know, I think, like, that there are police officers that are undercover that are on there posing as those people to catch those, people looking to do those kind of things. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, for certain, the ability to communicate with people from distances and at the speed of light, so to speak, that does enhance a criminal's ability to work more effectively. However, while doing that, you're leaving a digital footprint.
That's true.
You're leaving a paper trail that ultimately can be used as evidence. And so it works against them as much or probably more than it works for them. So technology has been a great tool, and it continues to advance, and law enforcement uses it to their advantage. The problem is really just with the way our justice system is set up, and we've put more emphasis on the rights of a criminal than we do on the rights of a victim. And that's, for me anyways, we've got that completely lopsided, and until we fix that, we're going to continue to have the crime that we have here in America.
Yeah, we agree with that 100% wholeheartedly. And there's a case in Canada right now where some armed men broke into a person's home with his family, and he shot them. I think he killed one person, and
he killed one.
The other person's injured, and he got arrested, and he's on trial for murder, or I think it's probably second degree or manslaughter or something, because you're not allowed to discharge your firearm unless there's that equal force that the criminal is putting out there as well. And it's like, well, someone's breaking into your home in the middle of the night. You're not going like, let me see if he has a gun, and if he doesn't, maybe I'll use my baseball bat. Like, I don't know. You got to defend your family. And so the good news is we saw that he's actually out on bail, and his lawyer said that the Crown did not push back on that. They were okay with giving him bail. And so who knows, maybe it's a precedent-setting case soon to be, where the law changes a little bit in the favor of everyday citizens to defend their homes. But yeah, I agree with you. A lot of people now, they're so, before it never even used to be a conversation. Now it's like, well, the criminal becomes the victim, and it's this victim mentality that keeps getting perpetrated, right? And I don't agree with that. We also don't agree with defund the police. You don't agree with defund the police,
Heck
right?
no, of course not. We need the police.
We need the police.
Wasn't for the police, there'd be complete anarchy and chaos.
Yeah, exactly. How do you feel about that when you hear somebody being, a decorated detective, and like, how do you feel about that when you hear people say defund the police?
I say let's try it for a week.
Just a week.
Yeah.
Those
Just a
people
week.
that are, and this is what often happens. Those people have no idea what they're asking for. It just sounds like something that's emotionally driven in the moment because they perceive some injustice and think that that's the way to answer it. Well, try it for a week. Those very same people are going to be screaming for the cops to get back on, back on the streets. They have no idea what we do out there in order to keep that thin blue line between chaos and anarchy in a civilized society.
Definitely. And I think a lot of people, especially when you see the videos on social media, so a lot of people tend to, you've probably seen this, they record like the whole video and then they only post half of it or a clip of it showing, let's say, officers, on top of somebody, and it looks like they're just, assaulting him, right? But what often many viewers don't see is the full story of, what happened before, what led there. Was there a call out saying there's a man with a weapon walking around, with a knife, threatening to kill people, right? A lot of people don't really see that kind of part or hear that part. They just see the part where the officers engaged and that person attempted, to kill the officers and they had to do what they had to do, right? What are your thoughts on that whenever you see those videos or you hear about those things that happen in the news?
Well, I think that it reveals a person that is more interested in getting their own attention or more interested in driving a narrative than it is about somebody who is truly just trying to offer information in order to understand a situation better. And this is even more prevalent in American media, that everybody is coming at these stories with an agenda and trying to use situations to drive a narrative, a pre-established narrative. And objective journalism in America is a thing of the past. We just, every news station, whether it's the left CNN or the right Fox, is using information to drive a pre-established narrative. They don't give a, pardon my language, they don't give a shit about the truth. They only understand their own, they understand a position that they have dug their heels into, and then interpret information or present information only to support that pre-established position. And it's a disaster here because everybody believes that they can watch the news and get valuable information, but oftentimes it's the very opposite that's happening. You're getting skewed information that is actually keeping you from understanding the objective truth.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
It's happening here too, Greg. We have government-funded news stations. We've got privately owned news corporations, and it's happening here as well. So it's unreal how many people still tune in and say that's the truth, whereas they can't just be, as you said, objective and see all sides of the equation. So
well, that's why they're trying to ban TikTok, right? So I don't know if you guys tried this, but I did yesterday, and if you search up France on TikTok, just type it in the search bar, France, you'll start to see like real live videos of like the riots and everything happening. As opposed to if you type in France on Instagram, all you see is beautiful selfies, and photos of croissants and things like that. So that's scary though, because when you're really looking at it, look at how much they're trying to stop us from knowing the truth about what's going on in the world. And they're trying to keep it, very 1984, like George Orwell. Right? Yeah. Like that totalitarian, censorship, right? And they're even trying to pass some censorship bills here in Canada as well too, to censor what we see on the internet, which is very scary if you think about it. So yeah, it's crazy. The truth is so important, but these days, like you said, Greg, it's very, subjective, I want to be a cat or I identify as a cat and that's my truth, and it doesn't make sense these days. So it's crazy.
It's insane. I mean, truth is the most valuable commodity that we can have. And once that is undermined or diminished, you can't fix any problems. You can't fix problems without truth.
Yep.
I got to ask you, Greg, going back to the detective days. So you're an LAPD detective, you're working narcotics. What's one of the, most memorable moments, so to speak, when you were working in narcotics?
So I'll tell you, the most fun I have ever had on the job, which are the most memorable, were just pursuit driving. When you're chasing people in high speed pursuits,
That's awesome.
It's so scary that it's fun. And and if you're the passenger officer, it's horrifying because you have no control of the car. But if you're
That's so scary.
If you're the driver and you think I can, then it's a blast. And but it's so exciting. The most fun. I remember being in these high speed pursuits and just belly laughing.
No way.
It was so fun. And they're dangerous, and you hope nobody gets hurt. But I'll tell you, when you're working with a really good partner, because LAPD is all, 2-man cars. And so once you get a really good partner and you guys have really good synergy together, you can just have a lot of fun out on the job. And, whether it's chasing people down alleys or just seeing the kind of weird stuff that you see on a day-to-day basis, or, in these high-speed police pursuits. And you're like, why does this guy think he can get away? We have helicopters, we have radios. Like you can't outrun our tools. But they try. Then it all comes to a screeching halt somehow, usually with the car upside down. And those are the good times.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you on that point, what was one of the weirdest things that you've seen now that you touched on that? I'm just curious.
Gosh, there's been so many weird things. I remember going in as a homicide investigator, and there was a fire at a kind of like an old folks home. And, all the people, unfortunately, that were in that place were in their, the kind of beds, like hospital beds, and have the rails on them and everything. And something happened and the house went up in flames. And the most bizarre thing was, like, everything was burnt to the ground. I mean, all that was left was the metal of the beds. And there was this in the middle of this room, and I kid you not, was this Bible, and it was open. And the edges of the pages were singed and burned, but the pages themselves were still intact. And there in the middle of this, in the middle of this Bible is this story about fire and brimstone. Because I remember, how did this book not burn? It was just it made no sense. But the passages on those pages were really kind of prophetic in the sense of, and I mean, this is horrible to even be looking at this lightly because 6 people perished in that fire. But there's just strange things like that. I remember being at the morgue one time, and there was a child that had died of from SIDS, from sudden infant death syndrome. And it was this beautiful young little male child, infant, and his eyes were wide open, and he had just the most crystal blue eyes. And there was just something like I couldn't take my eyes off of this kid, and his eyes were wide open and blue, and his face just looked like alive. And I couldn't imagine the pain that a parent would feel by losing something that beautiful and innocent. But I couldn't make sense of the fact that I'm looking at this child and he doesn't look like dead to me. His face is vibrant and blue.
Wow.
I don't know. You get weird memories that come back. I remember being at the morgue once, and there was this Asian lady that was unidentified, and she had passed away, and there was a toe tag on her. And this is the bizarre humor of morticians and cops. They hadn't identified her, but the toe tag on it, somebody had written "long gone."
Wow.
Wow.
That's so bad.
That's crazy, man.
That's so bad. The Bible thing is very interesting that you brought that up because I've seen videos on social media where there's been somebody's house catches flames, and the only thing that survives is the Bible. It's surprised that you said that now. Yeah.
On that note, I wanted to ask you, Greg, just curious. I'm sure you've probably heard of him. Just wondering if you know him. There's a cold case homicide detective named J. Warner Wallace. He's featured on a couple episodes of, I think it's called Dateline, like the detective show.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of him before?
Wallace, I don't believe so. Was he LAPD?
I don't think he was LAPD. The reason why I brought it up is because he was a cold case homicide detective. He solved one of the like really big cases. I think it was like 30 years after it went cold. And then he actually investigated the resurrection of Jesus Christ in Christianity as a detective, though, from his detective lens, which was kind of interesting, I thought. And he actually came out to find that there was so much evidence to support the resurrection story of Jesus in Christianity. And then he actually, turned and started believing and putting his faith and trust in there. So I was just wondering, because it's that same kind of life that you had. He was a detective as well, and he actually looked into something like that. And it's funny that you brought up, that story of the Bible. So I just had to ask you.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. I have a book called The Case. There was a guy that wrote a series. He was a journalist. I think he was with the Boston Globe. His name escapes me right now, but he had written a best-selling book called The Case for Christ.
Yeah.
And he was an investigative journalist, and then he wrote The Case for the Resurrection. Yeah. And he did essentially the same thing, where as an investigative journalist, he just looked at all the claims, saw the evidence to support this event. And coincidentally, back in 1999, my quest for spiritual truth was done as an investigator. And that led me to my faith, which is a Christian faith. It's a Christ-based faith. But it was only because I was able to look at it objectively through the eyes of an investigation and come to conclusions that I believe are irrefutable. And so I think that you can apply these investigative principles to all different things in life in order to, separate fact from fiction, and then come to truths that are meaningful and valuable for you as a person, but also for us as a society.
We love that.
That's amazing. Yeah, we're Christian too, so that's awesome that you mentioned that. But check out that book, or check out J. Warner Wallace. I feel like you guys would have so much in common, especially because now that we know you share the same faith. And he literally found the faith the same way it sounds like you did, right? Through the lens of his detective glasses, or so to speak. So. And
I've got the Case for Christ books. I got a box next door. I give them to my clients all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
All right. For the purposes of the clicks and the YouTube algorithm and all that, I want to really get into now, you're in narcotics and you get recruited. You get recruited for robbery, homicide. And the case, I forget how many binders were put on your desk. 97 binders or something like that.
Yeah, it was, and there was just boxes and boxes and boxes of big 4-inch binders that were just loaded with investigative material that they had compiled over that, the previous nearly 10 years.
Yeah. And so correct me if I'm wrong. The first case was Christopher Wallace, or did they just happen at the same time? Christopher Wallace and Tupac?
Well, of course, Tupac was murdered in Las Vegas. So technically his case was being handled by another jurisdiction. Right. And we were tasked with the responsibility of Biggie's murder because it happened in LA. But everybody knew that those two were likely going to be connected, just because there was this long history of conflict that had gone between both, Biggie Smalls and Tupac, Suge Knight and Puffy Combs, Death Row and Bad Boy. So, when you have a pre-existing conflict as an investigator, you've already got your motive is now built in. You can start to look at, because that's where you start with every investigation, is like who had a motive to do this. And that was always understood to be probably going to, that we were probably going to find connections between the two. So I got recruited over I was working major narcotics, and I get a call from somebody at Robbery Homicide Division, and they said, hey, we're reopening this investigation, and we'd like to have you, come on over and give us a help, because we want to put fresh eyes on it. We want to look at it from a fresh, new perspective. And I had a lot of gang experience. I had homicide experience, particularly cold case experience. And so I had the right qualifications to come in and be part of that team. And then we even built a bigger team. And at the end, I think there was 16 of us from 7 different agencies that participated into this new effort to solve the crimes.
Where do you even, I can't even picture, like, where would you even start when you walked into that room, you saw all those binders, right? Like, tell us, like, where you started, like how it went.
Well, we needed to go through it all just to make sure that nothing was missed. But essentially, there's what we call periodic, like, updates. And so the previous investigators would have written a summary of the things that they discovered, the people that they thought may have been involved, and some of the investigative steps that they'd taken thus far. So you can get this kind of summarized review of the case, and then you have to get into the actual weeds of it and going back and seeing whether anything was overlooked. All of the conventional investigative methods had been exhausted. So we knew that we were going to have to come up with something a little bit unconventional and apply some things that hadn't been applied before, which is why we federalized the case. Because by federalizing the case, we could get access to funding and the amount of money that would help us to take a new approach to it all, like wiretaps. Wiretaps are really expensive investigative tools. And so in order to get a wiretap, you have to exhaust every other investigative method. It has to be like a last resort for us to infringe on people's privacy at that level. And so, we just all collectively came together. We had firearms experts, drug experts, homicide experts, wiretap experts, and we just brought people from all these different fields and their expertise to bear on the case.
And you go through this work. How many years approximately? I think you said 3 or 4 years you were working on this?
We don't get our confessions until nearly 3 years into the case.
Wow.
So we started in 2006 and we had confessions in 2009.
Okay. And then it didn't get prosecuted ultimately. Is that correct?
Correct. There is so much time had passed that most of the responsible parties had passed on. They were all active gang members, and they died as a result of being in that, with that lifestyle. They were getting shot for unrelated reasons. All of them mostly were shot and killed in unrelated gang actions.
Yeah, so you've gotten to use different channels and different platforms, Netflix with the murder rap, to really put all this out, plus your book, to put all this, investigative work out there and say, we know who did this. It didn't get prosecuted, but we could kind of put it to rest that we've done this. So does part of you say, I feel fulfilled that we did all that work, we put all that time and effort, even though it didn't get prosecuted? Or does part of you still say, I really wish, we were able to prosecute?
Well, I think if I'm speaking on what I wish the families could have had, then I would have liked to have seen some prosecution, because I think that would have given them some closure and some sense of, confidence that the right people were being held responsible. However, in a more divine way, perfect justice took its course, because those people that shot and killed somebody were themselves then shot and killed. And so in one way, it's the perfect justice, an eye for an eye. And so I'm okay with it. I'm at peace with it all. But I do wish that the families, the Shakur families and the Wallace families, would have gotten some type of judicial justice, just so that they could have the confidence of knowing that the people responsible were being held accountable. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Were you ever, for one time, like while you were doing the investigating for this case, were you ever like worried that someone might come after you or like your family? Like, do those thoughts, like, does that happen in real life? Or we know, like, we see that in movies and shows and things like that. But were you ever once like worried that like these guys, like, maybe, I don't know, like one of those guys, you know, would look into you or
Suge Knight or
someone,
somebody?
Yeah.
No, I don't have that disposition. I don't live like that. I don't think that if you're going to live in fear that you should be a cop. If you're going to be an investigator, then you have to accept all of the things that come along with that role. And you can't let fear interfere, slow you down, or change the way that you live or the way that you approach your job. I never was worried about it, you know, because, you know, you better get the drop on me, because if you don't, you know, I'm going to be standing there in a position to defend myself.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and again, this also goes back to some degree to your faith, is that, you know, you just put things in God's hands and do the right thing, be a good person, live by the rules, and then let fate take its course.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I love that.
Yeah.
When it's time to go, it's time to go. But what you said about the perfect justice, you know, an eye for an eye, that a lot of people, they take what Einstein said about an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. But what they misinterpret is when in the Bible, when it talks about an eye for an eye, that was the law that was put forth in terms of how to punish criminals. That's what an eye for an eye meant. It didn't mean you go around, you know, someone sucker punches you, you sucker punch them back. It was more for somebody robs your goat, they have to repay you a goat. Or somebody, you know, is killing someone else, they're paid with capital punishment. And so I just wanted to mention that to our audience, because that's what you mean by perfect justice. And then obviously follow that up with, if you live by the gun, you will die by the gun. Or in the old days, if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. And so I get what you're saying about that. And I want to ask you about, you mentioned something that in one of your interviews, you said gangs operate differently from the mob. So you primarily focused on gangs. We've had a lot of past mob figures come onto our show. So for those people that are listening who are very intrigued with the mob world, tell us how organized crime differed from the gangs.
Well, organized crime, you know, as the name suggests, is more organized. You know, they typically have a little bit more pre-established hierarchy. They typically live by codes and rules that are identifiable and adhered to within the organization for the most part. Gangs are much more loose. Gangs are much more spontaneous. Gangs are much less organized. And although they may have some kind of, you know, perceived hierarchy, it really doesn't work like that in the real world. They all kind of operate independently. When it's convenient, they come together and operate collectively. They typically don't have the intellectual capabilities of thinking in very structured ways. Most of these kids are, for the most part, uneducated. They live in a very difficult environment. And that environment informs their worldview. It informs their mentality. And they don't think in, you know, logical processes. So it's a mentality difference. It's an environmental difference. And it's a sophistication difference between street gangs and organized crime.
Okay, and with regards to, I want to connect it to snitching, and the reason why I got to connect it to snitching is the most common comments that we get on our mob videos is people just say snitch or you rat or whatever the case may be to the guests that we have on the show. when in reality, probably a lot of those people would snitch themselves. But you gave an interesting percentage. You said about 75% of people would, probably snitch. But in your viewpoint, is this question even relevant? Who would be more likely to snitch? Someone from the mob or someone from a gang?
Somebody from a gang.
Okay.
Why is that?
Yeah, why is that?
Well, A is that let's say within organized crime and the mob, there's a sense of loyalty that that for instance, if you keep your mouth shut, you do your time, you don't inform against other co-conspirators or against the organization, they'll take care of your family. They'll look after your family, and they'll probably look after you when the time comes for you to reintegrate. So, you have to weigh the risks versus rewards. In the gangs, it's really every man for himself. And they don't take care of each other. You go to prison or you go to jail, you're forgotten about. Nobody's taking care of you. Nobody's taking care of your family. They just, so there's no reason not to look out for yourself. And oftentimes looking out for yourself means doing what is best for you, which is cooperating, getting the some type of mitigation on your sentence, oftentimes not even having charges filed. And so, it's more of an individualistic perception or more of an individualistic mindset than with the mob or with organized crime where it's corporate.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, have you ever been in a situation, Greg, where you're trying to, get a confession from somebody, right? And, you go up to them and you say to them, listen, we have all this evidence on you, and if you don't testify or give us what we want and work with us, we're going to put you away for life. Have you ever had anyone that said to you, like, yeah, I'm not helping or I'm not cooperating? Have you ever been in that situation? Or has it been most of the time where they've just worked with you and given you what you wanted and what you asked for?
More often than not, it's the case where we can come to some type of deal. Everybody has, I think I've mentioned this either in my book or elsewhere, there's kind of a number in their mind. And if they're facing a long prison sentence and they want to see that reduced, then, you can make offers. You don't make offers, but the attorneys make offers in order to convince a person to cooperate. And so more often than not, you can work out a deal. However, there are occasionally people that just are stubbornly willing to keep their mouths shut and go to jail for whatever allotted amount of time they get sentenced to. And that's just the way it is. They live with that code. But it's more likely that people cooperate.
Got it.
What's your take on President Donald Trump's recent indictments?
Well, and I'm not saying this as an endorsement to Trump, because I'm a little bit neutral on everything political right now. I think that this is, it's such a, I'm looking for the right words. It seems to me that politicizing law enforcement agencies like the FBI or the DOJ for political gain is it's a slippery slope. And once you set this precedence, then we're going to just see this over and over, where these parties or whoever's in power is going to use these arms of law enforcement to do their dirty work. This is a joke insofar as what these charges are. We have politicians committing much worse crimes all the time that don't even go investigated, much less going to the point of a prosecution. So the guy had an affair with some hooker or porn star or whatever, and he works out a deal with her, says, hey, I'm running for president. That is so minor in today's world of political misconduct. We have much bigger issues to be concerned about than over whether or not Trump's lawyer told a girl, hey, are you willing to shut up for some money? And she says, sure, I'll shut up for some money. Big deal. Is that a crime?
Yeah, is that 80,000 emails deleted, or a laptop that's gone missing, or I don't know. There's so many other things, as you said.
And that is exactly my point. We have other things that are going on that clearly obstruction of justice in the Hillary Clinton, case. We have the suppression of truth with the Biden laptop.
Yep.
There has never been a more obvious quid pro quo than when President Biden was sitting down with he's President Biden now, but back at the time when he was the ambassador over to Ukraine, and he's essentially on tape saying, we'll do this for that. And, and then of course that gets flipped around and they try to, run with this Russian collusion case against ex-President Trump. The whole thing is just, we've lost any sense of dignity in our government. We've lost any sense of faith in our government. And I don't know where we're going with this whole thing, but it feels like, for me, we're on the verge of just imploding. We're so extreme on either side that the only middle ground seems to be a battleground. Yeah, and sense. who wants to experience that?
Nobody. I was speaking with somebody yesterday where I said, can you imagine they just, put conscription back into place and all young men, you got to go to war? And it's like, everybody I speak to go, yeah, that wouldn't happen. I would go north, or I would go back to a different country. And I said, yeah, I think that's when everybody would be on the streets protesting at that point. Like, it's like, what are we going to war for? It's one thing when another foreign country wants to invade you, but it seems like we got to figure out our own internal conflicts first and just come to a peaceful resolution. Like, there has to be compromise on both sides.
Yeah. Ironically, that's the only time we're unified is when we're at war.
Yeah, true.
That's true. But even to your point, like, it'll be very different right now just because of, technology and, different weapons like nukes and stuff like that, right? Like, even if they want to recruit, like, it won't really make a big difference in my opinion.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think you're right. We ask a lot of the mob guys that come on the show, what would you want to tell your younger self, or in your case, what would you want to tell somebody who is about to pick up a gun for the first time, or about to do something that's going to just change the course of their life forever, and perhaps join a gang and do something that they shouldn't be doing? You, with all of your experience and all this stuff that you're bringing to the table, what would you say to that person who's listening to you right now?
Well, our younger generation, they're so emotionally charged, and they attach their emotions to all these different causes. And when you are emotionally charged, you don't act reasonably. And so, what I would tell people, and this is a very difficult thing to ask of people, because these people, this young generation has been raised being told your emotions are everything. Your truth is as valuable as anybody else's. And so they're brought up believing this. And so then it's difficult to then tell them, like, hold on a minute, your emotions can't drive you. Your emotions can't dictate your actions. Your emotions shouldn't form your worldview. But that's our problem, is that we've given so much emphasis on emotional and psychological value, regardless of how, irrational it is. We just say it's still okay. and that gives people the it gives people the initiative to then go out and say, well, I'm going to express myself emotionally by taking a gun to a school. I'm going to express who I am by going into this setting and causing destruction, because this is how I'm going to cry. This is how I'm going to scream. This is how I'm going to yell. And so it's a very difficult thing to now change the mindset of a generation that has been told that their emotions are, the end all and be all of who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. It's before, I feel that one of the things I used to study in my early 20s was emotional intelligence, right? You wanted to be able to know yourself and be somewhat in control of your emotions. And now it's like, throw that out the window. You feel like this one day and you feel like this the other day, and that's fine. And do what you want to do. And it reminds me, every time we were talking about this, it's funny that we mentioned the faith conversation. That wasn't part of this conversation initially in my mind. But what did Pontius Pilate say? What is truth, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that this whole conversation. What is truth? It seems like that's come back. That spirit has come back, or maybe never left, and it's just more prevailing today, that what is truth. But there is a truth, and there is a moral compass that you should be following. And not every voice in your head is the right voice that's telling you what to do or how to act or how to behave, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. We have this compounding problem of, we've changed our social mindset to where the individual's an individual's ultimate responsibility is to themselves instead of to the better, to the larger picture, or to their neighbors, or to their society. Everything is now about self, as opposed to, we used to have the idea of like, what can I do for the betterment of mankind? What can I do for the betterment of my community? What can I do for the betterment of my household? And it was a selfless way of living. Well, we've flipped that on its head, and now all that matters is how you feel. Your individual rights, your individual personality takes precedence over the larger group. And so when that happens, again, we end up in this horrible situation where people they don't feel responsibility for what they do to other people.
Yeah, I think it was Kennedy who said it. Don't ask what you could do or your country could do for you, but ask what you could do for your country, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we need to reinstigate that motto.
I was just gonna say, like, I think a lot of it goes to also social media, right? Where everybody can just say something on social media, and a lot of people perceive it as, this is the truth. It has to be. Someone's wearing a doctor's coat, and little do they know they're not even a doctor, and they're giving people advice on health and things like that, right? So there's just a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of people are trying to be somebody that they're not. And for them, like you were mentioning before, if they feel like they should be like that, they're gonna go and do that, right? Because their feelings are 100% correct, and they feel like it's okay to act on every feeling that we have, which obviously is not a good thing, right?
Yeah, we've in our educational system has failed us, and then it hasn't taught people how to think objectively. We haven't, we don't really, we force classes on, some new type of math that has no application in life, but we're not helping people how to think rationally. We're not giving them the philosophy and philosophical ideals that they need in order to think clearly and reasonably, and how to assess information fairly. And instead, we've just, I think I heard somebody say the other day that the truth is the last thing that you've heard. And this goes back to what you mentioned about social media. You read something, and then that becomes your truth for the moment.
Yep.
until you read something the next day, and now that's your position.
Yeah.
And so the truth is just the last thing you've heard, instead of understanding, like, this is what I've heard. Let me now take the time and energy to determine whether or not I should believe it to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah. One good quote I heard was, many people will die for the truth, but they won't spend 5 years investigating what the truth actually is. I've heard that before. That was really a good quote. I would be remiss, and I know we're running short on time, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, somebody who comes from the narcotics background and major narcotics division in the LAPD, what's your take on, especially places like Canada now, decriminalizing some of the hard drugs like fentanyl and cocaine and things like that?
I think that, we've failed in our country to control the influx of drugs, obviously. Pharmaceutical drugs are obviously a huge issue, but then the illegal drugs that are flooding into the country from the southern borders mostly. And, I don't understand why our government isn't treating this as a form of terrorism, because of what is actually happening, the epidemic on our streets. I have close friends whose family members have overdosed on fentanyl. And it's just, we're not treating it for the epidemic it is. Anybody that's caught dealing fentanyl, that should be a minimum mandatory 25-year sentence, because it's ultimately attempted murder.
Yeah.
In a certain type of way. When you're giving people drugs that has been proven to be life-threatening, why aren't we treating it like that? Why aren't we pursuing these individuals as if their intent is to kill people?
Yeah, makes sense.
So I've had a great conversation.
This was awesome.
Yeah, it's good when you don't script anything and you could just go off and have an honest conversation about things. What do you want to leave our listeners with before we close the show? First of all, what do you want to leave our listeners with, but also tell them where they can find you and perhaps what you're working on?
Yeah, so currently I'm working on a documentary series about a guy named Christopher Dorner. Christopher Dorner was a ex-LAPD officer who had been terminated for lying during a hearing, and he went in on a shooting rampage in Southern California and ended up killing 4 people, 3 police officers and a civilian, shooting a couple of other people that were seriously wounded. And he just left a path of destruction. He had a 10-day shooting spree until eventually he was caught up in Big Bear, California. He had a big shootout with law enforcement. The cabin he was in caught on fire, and then he decided to, like most cowards, he decided to take himself out. So he died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So I'm working on a documentary to kind of really tell that story in a comprehensive way, because there's a lot of timely aspects to the story that are relevant today. He was making claims of racism. He was an African-American guy, and he was making claims of prejudice and racism, discrimination, and it was all bullshit. The truth of the matter was he couldn't face his own deficiencies, but he used racism as a platform to be a martyr. And what we're trying to show is, like, what happens when you take a platform built on a false foundation and you claim divisive issues like racism. What does that actually do to the legitimate claims that are out there, those legitimate incidents of racism? It undermines them, because now you've got a guy that the society can look at and goes, oh, it's just another guy using claiming, And anyways, that's what I'm working on. I'm working on this documentary. It's really compelling to me. And that's it. I'm all, I'm an open book. So anybody looking for me will find me.
And awesome. You got your own Instagram account where people can follow you?
I do. I'm not very technically savvy. I don't do a lot of social media. I have a Facebook page. I think I have an Instagram account that I never check. I don't multitask well. I'm one of those
focus.
guys.
You
You're
focus.
super focused. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, I get random emails all the time, and I do my best to respond to them. And yeah, otherwise, just living a relatively simple life. I've got these damn dogs running around, and I got a wonderful wife. But aside from that, it's just all about trying to stay busy.
Awesome. So there you have it, you guys. Do your duties, like and subscribe. I think this was one of my favorite episodes.
Oh, definitely.
I enjoyed
100%.
it. And, share it with your family and friends. Help with the YouTube algorithm. We got to get this channel to 100K subs by the end of this year. That's our goal.
Hit those likes, man.
Hit those likes. Leave us a comment. And Greg, thank you again for your time, for your stories. We had a great time.
Thank you, Greg.
Awesome. My pleasure. It's been a great way to start the day.